WNST, it's House Pittsburgh Sucks Week here officially. I wish we had an extra day, but we do get 7 extra hours in Pittsburgh to think it all through as Luke and I head to the Confluence on Sunday night for a little Sunday night football and a little bloodthirst matchup here between the Steelers and the Ravens. But it will be without Jimmy Smith. We talked so much in the early part of the season about injuries and the loss of Marshall Yanda being the best player on the Ravens. Certainly Justin Tucker would have his case as MVP, and Joe Flacco's loss would probably end any thoughts of a Ravens run in January at all. But the loss of Jimmy Smith is going to have us scratching our heads. And Luke, I know we go back to April when the Ravens and when Ozzie Newsome decided to draft a cornerback instead of a tight end that was widely regarded and highly thought of from Alabama, as well as some other positions. Marlon Humphrey came off the board. Some people said, we've already got a cornerback. I think you and I agreed you can't have enough cornerbacks, and here we go, Week 13, going to Pittsburgh without Jimmy Smith.
Well, and I think there's still an argument to be made that the Ravens should have gone offense there. Well, when you look at how this offense has performed, I mean, let's not completely change that, but it was a reflection of what has been the sad story of Jimmy Smith's career. I mean, this guy is incredibly talented. He was having the best season by a Ravens cornerback in franchise history. When you consider and go back to the guy that most people would consider to be the best corner in franchise history is who? Chris McAllister. Go back and look at how many times Chris McAllister would be penalized over the course of a season and compare that to how many times Jimmy Smith has been penalized this year in this day and age, in 2017, not 2000 or 2003, where the rules were certainly not catered toward the defense, but certainly more balanced in that regard. This guy was having such an incredible season. He had been their most valuable player. In my mind, he's been the Ravens' best player in 2017. To lose him is just so disappointing, but, and this was the biggest argument for Ozzie Newsome drafting Marlon Humphrey, he hasn't been able to stay healthy in his career. We've seen this in 2014 when he, at that point, was having the best year of his career and was finally living up to the first-round hype after a slow start to his NFL career. We saw this last year when the Ravens appeared poised to make a run in the final month of the season. They lose Jimmy to a high ankle sprain, and he was done for the year, and we saw how this defense collapsed. So the good news is the Ravens are far better equipped to handle this injury than they were in those two previous instances. But that said, Marlon Humphrey is not Jimmy Smith. Maybe he will be one day. Maybe he'll be better than Jimmy Smith one day. But at this point, and we saw this in the second half on Sunday, he's not that player. And it would be too flippant just to say, well, next man up, the Ravens are going to be fine. There's not going to be any drop-off, and I know John Harbaugh said he was confident in their young players and that there's not going to be drop-off. There's going to be some drop-off. The question is how much of it, but the good news is I think Marlon Humphrey does have the ability that if the rest of this defense continues to play well, that there shouldn't be such dramatic drop-off where you're fearing it's going to torpedo your season like it did last December, quite frankly.
Well, it torpedoes your season when you see Tom Brady or Ben Roethlisberger in January, right? Or a Matt Ryan or, whomever that would be. It doesn't torpedo your season when you see Jacoby Brissett or DeShone Kizer, right? But they're going to miss him in Pittsburgh, so they're going to miss him in general. When I think of last year, I think of everything turning for them. And I know they weren't a great team, and we can make all sorts of excuses about why they got beat. They got beat by wide receivers late, often last year, and that was all about Jimmy Smith. And I am concerned about that. There's a reason those guys make $12 and $15 million bucks, much like Marshall Yanda. There is no replacing him. But in the case of Humphrey, there was an insurance policy that they'll now get to put into place and see it work. It is a shame. It's very, very unfortunate because I liked this team a whole lot more before Jimmy Smith went down in regard to winning in Jacksonville, winning in Nashville, winning in L.A., going to New England or Pittsburgh and having a credible chance to pick a couple of balls off, run the ball a little bit, have Flacco hit a play or two, have Tucker hit a kick, and all of a sudden you're in a championship game again. And don't laugh. I mean, they're 7-5 now. It looks like they're going to make the playoffs, so I think we can start talking sort of cocky playoff, can we win in January? I know Flacco started talking about it last Monday night. I don't think there's any harm in that in December when you're 7-5, maybe on the road to 10-6 or 11-5, to say, can we steal games in January? Because that's what it is when you go on the road, right?
It is, and that's why this is such a frustrating injury, because if this team is going to make a run, and with apologies to what the offense did on Sunday, because they were terrific, but we've seen what this offense has been for 12 games now, and for the most part, it's been pretty darn bad. We knew that the strength of this team has been, will continue to be, its defense, but without Jimmy Smith in the picture now, what's that ceiling in comparison to when he is on the field? You know, this is a team that the defense appeared to be trending in the right direction. I mean, certainly with having the shutout against Green Bay, and they had a shutout 2 games before that, and knowing who they were going to be playing in the final 3 weeks of the season after they were going to get through the Detroit and Pittsburgh games. You were hoping that this defense was going to be on the cusp of maybe being one of the second, third, fourth best defense in the history of the franchise. And look, that's no guarantee that was going to happen with Jimmy Smith. But now, knowing that he's done for the year with that torn Achilles, it makes it much more difficult to envision the defense being great enough. And with that thought in mind, maybe that's where you do look at how the offense played on Sunday and kind of say, okay, well, the timing of that, I know they're not going to score 35 or 40 or 44 points every week, but hopefully they can bottle some of that up because they're going to need it. Now, I still think the Ravens are in good shape and certainly going to be favored against the likes of Indianapolis and Cleveland and Cincinnati once they go up to Pittsburgh and see what happens there. But as you were mentioning, when you're talking about the possibility of how big of a threat can this team be in January, when you lose your best player on a defense that's trying to be great, a defense that has been great for large stretches of time this year, it's hard not to look at that and not kind of have the air, kind of lose the air out of your sail a little bit when you consider how well that game was going. They had the big lead in the first half, and look at the play he was injured. I mean, well, look what happened on that play. The defense is euphoric, and then you look over and see Jimmy Smith on the ground, and then you see the replay very quickly, and it was pretty obvious what had happened. So it's not the death sentence, but it certainly makes things more difficult and makes you wonder just how great this defense can be down the stretch. I think it's still a good defense without him. The second half notwithstanding as far as some of the issues they had against Detroit. But knowing what it takes to win in January, knowing what this team was built on, it was built on defense, and even with drafting Marlon Humphrey, it's not as though the Ravens drafted him and were planning on Jimmy Smith getting hurt. It's something that's disappointing because it challenges your depth, it hurts your upside, and it is going to put more pressure on this offense down the stretch. That I'm not sure that what we had seen for the better part of the first 11 games of the season, that typical offensive performance, I'm not sure that's going to be good enough now with Jimmy Smith out of the picture for the defense.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter 24 hours a day. He's on the backfields in Owings Mills. If there's any breaking news, you will get that first, all on the WNST text service, all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home. It is the SSV on WNST. It is Pittsburgh week around here. And all of our programming brought to you by D&L Window Tinting, 26 years of tinting everything, cars, boats, businesses. They put the shades on the sun. They take away the squint. They're in Parkville. They're in White Marsh, and you can find them here in the winter season to put a little purple tint on your thing there at D&L Window Tinting. Also brought to you by our friends Lee Tessier and his team at Keller Williams American Premier Realty. List your home with Lee, and you risk nothing ever. His team's going to get your house sold, guaranteed. LeeTessier.com is the way to find him. It is Lee Tessier and his team at Keller Williams American Premier Premier Realty. We appreciate their sponsorship here during the holiday season. Luke, we talk about the defense and taking the ball away, and that's what they do. And certainly when they pin their ears back at the end of a game where Stafford had beaten them 20 times consecutively, you go back to the well. The pass rush feels like it doesn't take a day off. It's a little inconsistent, fine, but it gets there. It's not like, let's say, the Lions pass rush, which was mostly inconsistent all day. Suggs is still running around back there. They're getting after the quarterback, no matter who that quarterback is. But even Matt Stafford throwing the ball up for grabs and letting the backup come up and throw Weddle another one. The defense cashed in at the end and really sort of slammed the door.
They really did. And as much as you look at the performance, the defense was very good in the first half. And yes, Detroit made some mistakes. They missed a field goal. They had the fumble snap on third down. They had some things that they certainly, where you would classify that as shooting themselves in the foot, but the defense had pitched a shutout in the first half. So you're thinking, okay, is this another one of those games where they're going to try to put a goose egg on the board and tie the 2000 Ravens? And we saw Matt Stafford come out. The Lions in general came out much better in the third quarter. How much of that had to do with Jimmy Smith being out and Marlon Humphrey being in? That had something to do with it. But even Eric Weddle talked about their intensity level not being there. And that's kind of code for, hey, they had a 20-0 lead and probably were thinking subconsciously that they're going to coast the rest of the way, kind of like they did against Green Bay or like they did against Cincinnati going all the way back to week 1. But when they needed to, after they'd given up some points, after they'd given up a couple touchdown drives, and you're starting to think, oh, this is getting uncomfortable, they come out midway through the fourth quarter. Suggs picks up a sack on Matthew Stafford, and then Marlon Humphrey gets the pick. And that put the Ravens back in great position, up 10 at that point, and then they scored a touchdown to put it up, to put it out of reach, so to speak. So it was good to see the defense tighten up. As you mentioned, the pass rush, inconsistent. I think they had some stretches where they absolutely put some colossal pressure on Matt Stafford. That Eric Weddle hit, they had some major plays in that game.
But Pease dials it up differently. You know what I mean? There were definitely a couple of third and longs where I felt like he was going to dial it up and didn't. Just went with a 4-man and they went and just played defense. Sometimes that worked. Sometimes Ebron beat him across the middle. And that's happened throughout the season. Maybe not as much against Jacksonville or, some of the games, Pittsburgh, when they really got run around, but they're susceptible, and certainly the first drive was a great example of how susceptible they were, right?
Yeah, and the one thing about this team, as much as we look at this defense and look at the shutouts and look at the times they played so well, look at the statistics, they've had some vulnerabilities. Their pass rush, with apologies to Terrell Suggs, who's been fantastic, especially since the bye week and had another sack on Sunday, it's been a little more inconsistent. Certainly Judon has flashed, and that's great to see that. And certainly he's been their second best in that department, at least as far as edge rushers. Now, Willie Henry's given them some inside rush, but it's been inconsistent. And you do go through that fine line of, okay, do you send an extra rusher or two and compromise your coverage in the back end, or do you have trust in a 4-man rush and that you're going to cover in the back end and eventually get to the quarterback? And that's the same balancing act that any defensive coordinator is going to go through, whether you have a really good defense or just an okay defense. That's always going to be kind of the scales trying to balance that out. And the Ravens have had times where they haven't gotten pressure. And you mentioned they've had some issues over the middle of the field, and they had Ebron and some of their other tight ends, and Riddick catching passes out of the backfield gave them some problems. But overall, when they needed to, they played very well in the first half for the most part, and then they dialed it back up midway through the fourth quarter, and that's what you want to see. This defense isn't going to be perfect every week, and that's even more true now with Jimmy Smith out of the picture and knowing that you're missing, if not your best player, certainly one of your two best players on that side of the ball. So it's just a matter of, can you just find enough consistency as far as playing at that level. And they've been able to do that for the most part. That's the biggest reason why this team's 7-5. We know it's not because of the offense. I mean, their defense has played at a high level.
Well, and there's every week there's a different star. It's kind of like the magic of Orioles baseball, right? I mean, Owasa was running around, really feeling his way early in the game, made some bigger plays at the end of the game. I mean, obviously, getting Big Willie Henry, and talking to him after the game, how much excitement there was. I've had a chance, Luke, and me being the old fart that I am and going into these locker rooms week after week now, 22 years into the Ravens, when I see the look on Willie Henry's face after he makes a play like that and is a part of it, when I saw the look on Anthony Levine's face last week after he picks the ball up, seeing Matthew Judon, right, in Green Bay after the game, and I know you were down there, after he makes a couple of big plays, seeing these young guys have a moment to be a star for a week, to carry the team or have a big play. We know Mosley, we know Williams, we know Weddle, the veteran guys, they've been pretty steady when they've been healthy. It really is about this next level, and I know Harbaugh wanted to give a game ball to the scouts about how well the young players are playing, how many minutes they're getting on the field, and contributing, whether it's Pierce, Carl Davis is getting into a rotation now, Kennedy's made some plays. I mean, these names that we hear about on draft day, maybe hear about them in August, you need to hear about those guys in December if you're going to be any good.
No question about it, and I think that's the one thing that I've been more encouraged about with this defense. I mean, Terrell Suggs has been unbelievable. We've already talked about it. I mean, John Harbaugh called him Ponce de Leon last week. I mean, kind of goes without saying. We've talked so much about that, and we'll continue to talk about that. I mean, I expect Eric Weddle to be a big-time contributor. He's getting paid that way. Same with Brandon Williams. It's been encouraging seeing some of these younger guys, the Willie Henrys, the Matt Judon, who had his moments as a rookie, but certainly wasn't a very consistent contributor. It's good to see that. It's good to see Marlon Humphrey shake off what had been a pretty rough half for him, quite frankly, to intercept a pass and to kind of he had the interception in Green Bay a couple weeks ago. It's good to see that, and yes, you certainly need to see it from a first-round pick like a Marlon Humphrey. But it's great when it's a fifth-round pick in Matt Judon, a fourth-round pick in Willie Henry. Undrafted guys like Michael Pierce and Patrick Owasso. I mean, let's face it. These are the guys that are some of these names that we just mentioned are going to be a couple of them are going to become core players for this defense in the not-too-distant future. I mean, Terrell Suggs isn't going to be around much longer. Eric Weddle's probably not going to be around for much longer. I mean, just being realistic, looking at that, you need some of these young guys to step forward, and you need depth. And while you still might be waiting to see, okay, who's going to be the next Hall of Fame caliber player on that defense? I mean, it's not 10 years ago where you had Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, and a young Terrell Suggs running around. But if you have some of these young guys step forward and some of them become starters and effective starters, and maybe that next Hall of Fame caliber defensive player on this defense isn't on the roster just yet, but if you can continue laying a good base, building depth, having good depth at every level of the defense, which they're building toward that. I think there's still some positions where they could use a little bit more.
Well, this season has been a big step up for the defense, no matter how it ends, and I don't think you and I are really thinking that it's going to end with us broadcasting from Minneapolis at the Super Bowl that they're in. But all that being said, this whole season, 12 games in, the balance of all of this, where they are at 7-5, has been because they have drafted well on defense. And Ozzy's done a pretty nice job of putting the defense together. We can talk about the offense all day long, and and how that's been more difficult. And certainly we could talk about the injuries in the offseason. We could talk about where the Matt Elams would fit in this, and the Arthur Browns, and where Perryman would be if where this offense would be if Perryman looked like DeAndre Hopkins as an example. Right? But that's not where we are. But defensively, yeah, I mean, I would look to say that they will build on this into the future, whether Suggs or Weddle are here next year or into the future. But I think Suggs has been far better than I thought he was going to be this year. And I think Weddle has kind of held his water a year and 3/4 into this thing.
Oh, sure. And I only brought those names up just because those guys are closer to the end of their career than the beginning. I mean, that's just the reality when you're talking about guys over 30 years old. The interesting thing you mentioned, and certainly the Ravens deserve credit for finding some of these day three kind of guys who have really been big contributors. However, let's look at the last 2 years, the second and third round. Last year, Kamalei Correa and Bronson Kafusi. Correa has kind of become Albert McClellan, for lack of a better comparison. I mean, he's a special teams guy and doesn't play very much defensively. And then this year, Tyus Bowser, who had kind of gotten to the doghouse a little bit early in the season where he had the really rough performance against Jacksonville, hasn't played a whole lot, although we've seen him here and there. Was out there running around a little bit, came close to having a sack.
Yeah, he missed it. He missed an empty shot there.
Yeah, should have had one, quite frankly. And the other one being Chris Wormley. So, they've had second and third round picks the last couple of years where they haven't really gotten much of a return, but because they've done so well in the fourth and fifth round and they found some undrafted gems, it's made up for that. So, I mean, you can look at it anyway. You could say, well, maybe you should have spent those second and third round picks on offense. And, hey, but that would be fair considering they haven't gotten much from those guys. But, the end result, at least on the defensive side, and we can talk plenty about the offense, and we'll talk plenty about that offense, and we'll write plenty about that offense because there's going to be a lot regardless of what happens between now and the end of the season. It's going to be a lot to digest and discuss as far as the future of that side of the ball. But the good news with this defense, and even if you look at it from a contract and cap standpoint, they're in pretty good shape as far as not really having many free agents. I think Brent Urban, probably their only substantial defensive free agent in the offseason, if memory serves correctly. And that's a guy that, while they had high hopes for him this year, he's been a pretty injury-riddled over the course of his time with the Ravens. Can't exactly say that's a major player to address there. So this defense, even though, yes, Terrell Suggs is getting older, and at least age-wise, maybe not by his play, and yes, you can talk about Eric Weddle and a couple guys like that. Overall, this is a pretty young defense, and these guys are under team control, and that bodes really well for the future and the ceiling for this defense, not just for the rest of this year, but over the next couple years.
He is Luke Jones. He is Luke at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. We're going to be running around all week long. It is Pittsburgh week around here. We're going to step it up a notch and get you going. Sunday night, we will be in Pittsburgh at Heinz Field with full coverage at WNST.net. Don't forget, anything you miss, you can find out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Reminder, we are the voice for Coppin State sports this year. Ladies, Eagles, as well as the men's. And, of course, Juan Dixon and Dwayne Burrows join us here weekly as Coppin State edges closer to getting some home games here coming up this week and into January in the MEAC as well. Don't forget, our breaking news service is brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis Kolatzis will be here on Thursday driving you home with the SSV on WNST. If the Orioles do anything, and at some point they're going to start doing a little WNST text dance, you'll get that first as well. Don't forget as well, Planet Fitness sponsors our WNST morning newspaper. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. It's still $10 a month. There's never any commitment. And you want to get in there while you got the eggnog and the pumpkin pie and all that holiday cookies and punch and all that stuff you're knocking back right now. You'll need Planet Fitness in 2018. Don't forget about them. We appreciate their sponsorship as well. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I am on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. The Ravens are 7-5. We're digging it. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.